Marcus Chen leaned back in his courtroom chair with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. His designer suit probably cost more than most people earned in a month, and the smirk on his face told everyone in the room that he thought my daughter Rebecca was about to hand over half of everything our family had built over 3 generations. I am Victoria Hayes, 72 years old, and I have been waiting 5 years for this exact moment. The manila folder in my lap contained documents that would transform Marcus from a celebrating soon-to-be ex-husband into a defendant facing serious federal charges. Every page represented months of careful investigation, sleepless nights, and the kind of patience that only comes from knowing your family is worth protecting at any cost. The divorce proceedings had been brutal for Rebecca. Marcus had hired an aggressive attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces, and together they had painted my daughter as an unstable woman who could not manage money or make sound decisions. They claimed Marcus had been the stabilizing force in the marriage, the financial mind who had helped grow the family business, and therefore deserved substantial compensation for his contributions. It was all lies, carefully constructed over 5 years of manipulation and deception. But lies only work when people do not know the truth. Your Honor, Marcus' attorney began, rising from his seat with theatrical flair. My client has been an integral part of the Hayes family business for the past 5 years. He brought financial expertise and strategic vision that increase profits by 40%. He deserves equitable distribution of marital assets, including a significant portion of the family trust. I watched the judge, the Honorable Patricia Williamson, review the financial documents with the careful attention of someone who had seen every trick in the book. She was a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for having zero tolerance for fraudsters. Rebecca sat at the plaintiff table looking exhausted and defeated. At 41 years old, she had been through hell for the past year. The divorce had drained her emotionally and financially, and Marcus had made sure to drag out every proceeding to maximize her suffering. He wanted her broken before the final settlement, thinking it would make her more willing to give him whatever he demanded. What Marcus did not know was that his mother-in-law had been documenting every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, and every illegal maneuver he had made since the day he walked into our lives 5 years ago. While he thought he was playing chess, I had been playing a much longer game. Your Honor, I stood up from the gallery, my voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade through silk. Before any settlement is finalized, I have evidence that the court needs to examine regarding Mr. Chen activities during his marriage to my daughter. The judge looked up sharply. Mrs. Hayes, you are not a party to these proceedings. Unless you are here as a witness, please remain seated. Your Honor, I am here as a witness to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. The documents in this folder contain evidence of crimes committed by Marcus Chen against my family and our business over the past 5 years. The room went silent. Marcus half rose from his chair, his confident expression cracking slightly. His attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, but Marcus shook him off. This was the moment he realized that something had gone terribly wrong with his carefully laid plans. Approach the bench, Mrs. Hayes. Judge Williamson gestured me forward. Her expression suggested she had dealt with enough courtroom drama to know when something significant was about to happen. I walked forward with measured steps, the folder held securely in my hands. 5 years of investigation, thousands of dollars spent on private detectives and forensic accountants, and countless hours of piecing together a puzzle that Marcus thought he had hidden perfectly. Every step toward that bench felt like vindication. Your Honor, I handed her the folder. This contains forensic evidence of embezzlement from Hayes Enterprises totaling approximately $2.7 million over 5 years. It also contains evidence of identity theft, specifically the unauthorized use of my financial information to open credit lines and access investment accounts. Finally, it contains evidence that Mr. Chen has been operating under a false identity since before he met my daughter. Judge Williamson opened the folder and began reviewing the contents. Her expression shifted from professional interest to serious concern as she turned each page. Marcus' attorney was now in full panic mode, frantically whispering to his client while trying to see what I had presented to the judge. Mr. Chen, Judge Williamson said after several minutes of review. Is your legal name Marcus Chen? Yes, Your Honor. His voice had lost some of its confidence. According to the documentation Mrs. Hayes has provided, Marcus Chen is actually Marcus Liu, wanted in California for securities fraud. The social security number you have been using belongs to a Marcus Chen who died in a car accident 7 years ago. Is this correct? The color drained from Marcus' face faster than water from a broken dam. His attorney stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I was not aware of any of this information. I need time to consult with my client. Sit down, Mr. Brennan. Judge Williamson's voice cut through his protest. This is no longer just a divorce proceeding. Bailiff, take Mr. Liu into custody while we sort out exactly what crimes have been committed here. The satisfaction of watching those handcuffs click around Marcus' wrists was almost overwhelming. 5 years of careful planning, of biting my tongue while he manipulated my daughter, of watching him slowly drain our family business while pretending to be a loving husband and devoted son-in-law. All of it had led to this single perfect moment of justice. Rebecca turned to look at me, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. She had known I was investigating Marcus, but I had kept the full extent of my findings secret even from her. The fewer people who knew what I was doing, the less chance Marcus would discover my investigation before I was ready to spring the trap. Mom, what is happening? Rebecca's voice was barely above a whisper. Justice, sweetheart. 5 years late, but justice nonetheless. As the bailiff led Marcus away, he turned to look at me with pure hatred in his eyes. You crazy old witch. You have been planning this from the beginning. Actually, Marcus, I replied calmly. I have been planning this from the moment you walked into my office 5 years ago, and I realized you were not who you claimed to be. You made one critical mistake in all your careful planning. You underestimated the protective instincts of a mother who built a successful business by learning to spot liars and frauds. The courtroom erupted into chaos after Marcus was removed. His attorney was demanding continuances and reviews. Rebecca was trying to process what had just happened, and Judge Williamson was calling for order while reviewing the rest of the documents I had provided. I sat back down in the gallery and allowed myself a small smile. The story of how Marcus Liu became Marcus Chen and infiltrated my family was about to become public knowledge. And with it, the story of how one grandmother spent 5 years building an ironclad case that would send a master manipulator to federal prison for a very long time. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. 5 years ago, I was running Hayes Enterprises from a comfortable corner office that overlooked downtown Seattle. My late husband Thomas had started the company 40 years earlier as a small import business, and I had grown it into a multi-million-dollar operation specializing in high-end textiles and home goods. Rebecca had been working as the creative director for 3 years, having finally found her calling after trying several different career paths. She was talented, hardworking, and still healing from a difficult divorce from her first husband. My grandchildren, Sophie and Nathan, were adjusting to being children of divorce, and Rebecca was doing her best to be both mother and father while building her career. That is when Marcus Chen arrived. He came to us as a financial consultant, recommended by one of our board members who claimed Marcus had helped his company restructure their debt and increase profitability. Marcus presented himself as a rising star in financial management, someone who specialized in helping family businesses transition to the next generation of leadership. His credentials were impressive. MBA from USC, 10 years of experience with major consulting firms, and a portfolio of successful business transformations. He was 43 years old, well-dressed, well-spoken, and seemingly perfect for helping us navigate some financial challenges we were facing. But from the first moment I met Marcus Chen, something felt wrong. It was not anything obvious. His resume checked out when we did standard background verification. His references gave glowing recommendations. His LinkedIn profile showed a steady career progression that all made sense on paper. But having run a business for 40 years, I had developed instincts about people that rarely steered me wrong. Marcus was too smooth, too polished, too perfectly saying exactly what we wanted to hear. In my experience, the best consultants challenged you and asked difficult questions. Marcus just agreed with everything and made promises that seemed almost too good to be true. I hired him anyway because our board insisted, but I also hired a private investigator named Raymond Torres to do a more thorough background check than our standard employment verification. It was that decision that would eventually save my family from complete financial ruin. Raymond's first report came back after 6 weeks, and it raised more questions than it answered. Marcus Chen's past was oddly sparse for someone claiming to have worked in finance for a decade. His college records existed but were minimal. His employment history was verified by phone numbers that Raymond noted all seemed to route through the same answering service. Most suspicious was that Marcus Chen seemed to have no digital footprint before 2015. "Mrs. Hayes," Raymond said during our meeting to discuss his findings, "something is not right with this guy. People do not just appear out of nowhere at age 38 with a fully formed career history. Everyone leaves traces: social media posts, old addresses, traffic tickets, credit history. Your Mr. Chen has almost nothing before 7 years ago. Can you keep digging?" "Yes. I want to know who this man really is before he gets too embedded in my company. I can try, but it is going to be expensive. If he is using an assumed identity, tracking down his real background will require some sophisticated investigation techniques. Do whatever it takes. If Marcus Chen is not who he claims to be, I need to know before he does any damage." While Raymond continued his investigation, Marcus was making himself indispensable at Hayes Enterprises. He restructured our debt, negotiated better terms with our suppliers, and implemented new accounting systems that made our financial operations much more efficient. The board loved him, our employees appreciated the improvements, and our profit margins started increasing exactly as he had promised. Marcus also started paying attention to Rebecca. It began innocently enough. He would ask her opinion on design choices for the office renovation. He would compliment her work on new product lines. He would join her for coffee to discuss business strategy, claiming he wanted to understand the creative side of the company better. Rebecca was flattered by the attention of a sophisticated older man who seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. After the disaster of her first marriage to a man who had ignored her career ambitions, Marcus' interest felt validating and exciting. I watched their growing connection with increasing concern. Every instinct I had was screaming that Marcus had targeted Rebecca deliberately, that his interest in her was not romantic but strategic. But how do you tell your adult daughter that the charming man paying attention to her is probably a con artist without any proof? 3 months into Marcus' employment at Hayes Enterprises, Raymond called me with news that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Victoria, I found him. Marcus Chen's real name is Marcus Liu, and he has a very interesting criminal history in California. Tell me everything." Marcus Liu was arrested 8 years ago for securities fraud in Los Angeles. He ran an investment scheme that defrauded elderly clients out of approximately $5 million. He jumped bail before trial and disappeared. There has been an active warrant for his arrest ever since. How did he become Marcus Chen? Identity theft. The real Marcus Chen died in a car accident 7 years ago. Liu somehow obtained his social security number and other identifying information, then built a completely new identity around it. The real Marcus Chen was a financial analyst who died at age 36. Liu is now using his credentials to pass himself off as a legitimate consultant. Felt sick. A wanted criminal was not only working in my company but was also pursuing my daughter romantically. The situation was far worse than I had imagined. "Raymond, I need you to get me everything you can on Marcus Liu's original crimes. Court documents, victim statements, anything that shows his pattern of behavior. And keep this investigation absolutely confidential. If Marcus finds out we are onto him, he will disappear before we can stop him." The evidence Raymond compiled over the next few months was damning. Marcus Liu had specialized in befriending wealthy widows and divorcees, gaining their trust, and then systematically stealing from them through various financial schemes. He was charming, patient, and utterly ruthless in exploiting people's vulnerabilities. Most disturbing was how closely his current behavior matched his previous patterns. He was integrating himself into our family business, building relationships with key people, and positioning himself to access financial systems and accounts. The only difference was that this time he was using employment and romance rather than pure friendship to gain trust. I had to warn Rebecca, but I knew she would not believe me without concrete evidence. She was falling in love with Marcus, and people in love do not want to hear that their partner is a criminal con artist. I needed to catch Marcus in the act of committing fraud so that Rebecca would see the truth with her own eyes. That meant I had to let Marcus continue his con while carefully monitoring everything he did. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only way to protect my family in the long term. I set up additional security measures on all company accounts, requiring dual authorization for any transfers over $10,000. I had our IT department implement invisible monitoring software that tracked every file Marcus accessed and every email he sent. I met weekly with Raymond to review Marcus' activities and look for evidence of fraud. For the next year, I watched and waited while Marcus slowly worked his way deeper into our company and our family. He became Rebecca's boyfriend, then her fiancé. He met my grandchildren and charmed them with gifts and attention. He attended family dinners and holidays, playing the role of perfect partner and stepfather. All the while he was stealing from us. The embezzlement started small, almost undetectable. Marcus would approve invoices for vendors that did not exist, pocketing the payments through shell companies. He created fake consulting contracts and paid himself for services never rendered. He manipulated expense reports and skimmed percentages from legitimate transactions. Over 3 years, he stole nearly $2 million. And no one noticed except me and Raymond because we were specifically watching for it. Marcus was sophisticated enough to spread the theft across multiple accounts and make each individual transaction small enough to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. But we documented everything. Every fraudulent invoice, every suspicious transfer, every penny that Marcus stole went into a growing file that would eventually become the evidence I handed to Judge Williamson in that courtroom. The hardest part was watching Rebecca marry him. The wedding was beautiful, Marcus' behavior was impeccable, and everyone thought my daughter had finally found happiness after her difficult first marriage. Only I knew that she was marrying a man who was systematically robbing our family while planning an eventual disappearance with millions of dollars. I stood at that wedding, smiled for photos, and silently promised my late husband that I would protect our daughter and grandchildren no matter what it took. 2 years into the marriage, Marcus began making moves to gain control of family assets beyond just the company accounts he was embezzling from. He started suggesting that Rebecca should have power of attorney over my finances in case something happened to me, with Marcus naturally helping her manage those responsibilities. He pushed for changes to the family trust structure that would give him access to funds designated for my grandchildren's education. He offered to help me update my estate planning documents, generously providing the name of an attorney who was probably his accomplice. This was the end game. Marcus had stolen what he could from the company, and now he wanted access to the family trust and my personal accounts. Once he had that, he would drain everything and disappear, leaving Rebecca and the children with nothing but debt and broken hearts. I had to stop him, but I also had to catch him committing a crime serious enough that he would face significant prison time. Embezzlement could be charged as white-collar crime with relatively light sentences. Identity theft and fraud against a senior citizen carried much heavier penalties. That is when I came up with a plan that would ultimately trap Marcus completely. I created a fake financial account in my name containing supposedly valuable stock certificates and bonds. I made sure Marcus found out about this account through a carefully staged conversation he was meant to overhear. Then I went on a planned trip to visit my sister in London, making sure everyone knew I would be out of the country for 2 weeks. While I was in London, Marcus attempted to use forged power of attorney documents to access that account. He had my signature forged on legal documents claiming I had given Rebecca and him authority to manage my investments. He presented those documents to the bank, along with false identification, and tried to transfer the assets. He did not know that the account was fake. The bank manager was working with law enforcement, and every second of his attempted fraud was being recorded on multiple cameras. He also did not know that I was keeping detailed records of my location in London, with time-stamped photos and receipts proving I was thousands of miles away when I supposedly signed those documents. When I returned from London, I had everything I needed to destroy Marcus completely. Attempted fraud, identity theft, forgery, and most seriously, elder financial abuse, which was a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentencing. But I waited. I wanted Marcus to feel secure, to think he had gotten away with it. I wanted him to continue planning his next moves so that we could document his entire pattern of criminal behavior. Most importantly, I wanted to wait until Rebecca filed for divorce, because I knew that moment would give me the perfect opportunity to expose Marcus to everyone at once. Rebecca's decision to divorce Marcus came after 4 years of marriage. She had finally started noticing the same red flags I had seen from the beginning. Marcus was becoming increasingly controlling about finances, isolating her from friends, and making decisions about the children without consulting her. The charming man she married was revealing himself to be someone much darker and more manipulative. When she told me she wanted a divorce, I wanted to cheer. Instead, I hugged her and told her I would support whatever decision she made. Then I called Raymond and told him it was time to finalize our case against Marcus Liu. The months leading up to the divorce hearing were brutal for Rebecca. Marcus fought everything, demanded ridiculous settlements, and used every legal maneuver to make the process as painful as possible. He was punishing Rebecca for daring to leave him, and he was also buying time to complete his financial theft and plan his escape. What Marcus did not know was that every aggressive move he made was actually helping build the criminal case against him. Every demand for money showed his true motives. Every attempt to access accounts he had no right to touch created more evidence of fraud. Every lie he told in court documents could be proven false with the evidence Raymond and I had compiled. And then came the divorce hearing where Marcus thought he was about to win everything. He sat in that courtroom with his expensive lawyer, his confident smile, and his complete ignorance of the trap that was about to spring shut around him. When I stood up with that folder and approached the bench, I was not just presenting evidence to the judge. I was culminating 5 years of the most difficult work I had ever done. Watching a criminal infiltrate my family, steal from my company, manipulate my daughter, and use my grandchildren as props in his con game had been agonizing. But it had also made me absolutely certain that Marcus needed to face the full consequences of his crimes. Judge Williamson spent 20 minutes reviewing the evidence before she called for Marcus' arrest. Those 20 minutes felt like hours as I watched her read through forensic accounting reports, identity theft documentation, and the attempted fraud at the bank. I saw her expression harden as she reached the sections about Marcus' real identity and his previous victims in California. "Mr. Brennan," she finally said to Marcus' attorney, "your client has been operating under a false identity while committing multiple felonies against his wife family. The evidence here documents embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, and attempted elder financial abuse. This court will not be finalizing any divorce settlement until criminal charges have been fully investigated and prosecuted. Your Honor," Mr. Brennan tried one last time. "I believe there are explanations for these apparent discrepancies. There are no explanations for using a dead man's social security number and stealing nearly $3 million from your employer and in-laws. Bailiff, take Mr. Liu into custody." As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Rebecca came to sit beside me in the gallery. Her face was pale and she looked like she was in shock, trying to process that the man she had loved and married was actually a complete fraud. "Mom, how long have you known?" Her voice was shaking. "From the beginning, sweetheart. I have been investigating Marcus since the day he walked into Hayes Enterprises. I am so sorry I could not tell you sooner, but I needed proof that would stand up in court. I needed to catch him in the act so that he could not talk his way out of it or disappear before facing justice. $3 million. He stole $3 million from us. Actually, it was $2.7 million from the company accounts, and he attempted to steal another $500,000 from my personal accounts. The total could have been much worse if I had not caught him." Rebecca buried her face in her hands. "I lived with him for 4 years. I let him around my children. How did I not see it? Because he is very good at what he does, Rebecca. Marcus Liu has been running cons for over a decade. He knows how to read people, exploit vulnerabilities, and present himself as exactly what his victims want to see. You were not foolish for trusting him. He was criminal for abusing that trust. The aftermath of Marcus' arrest moved quickly. The California authorities were thrilled to finally have a lead on a fugitive who had evaded capture for 8 years. Federal prosecutors were eager to charge him with the identity theft and elder fraud. And our local district attorney wanted to prosecute the embezzlement from Hayes Enterprises. Marcus found himself facing charges in multiple jurisdictions with a combined potential sentence of over 30 years in federal and state prison. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors were not interested in going easy on someone who had been committing fraud for over a decade. The investigation into Marcus' crimes uncovered even more victims than we had known about. Over the course of 12 years, Marcus Liu had stolen from at least 15 different individuals and businesses, using various identities and schemes. The total theft was estimated at over $7 million. Some of his victims were elderly widows he had befriended and stolen from through investment scams. Others were businesses where he had gained employment under false pretenses and embezzled funds. One woman had been engaged to Marcus under a different name, and he had stolen her entire inheritance before disappearing. Rebecca was devastated when she learned about all the other victims. She felt guilty even though she had done nothing wrong. She felt violated by the realization that her entire marriage had been a calculated con. Most painfully, she felt foolish for not seeing the truth sooner. I spent months helping Rebecca process everything that had happened. We went to therapy together. We talked for hours about the red flags she had missed and the manipulation tactics Marcus had used. We worked on rebuilding her confidence and her ability to trust herself again. The children needed support too. Sophie was 14 and Nathan was 12 when everything came out about Marcus. They had seen him as a stepfather figure, and learning he was a criminal who had been using their family was traumatic. We got them into counseling and focused on maintaining stability and routine while they processed their feelings. Meanwhile, the criminal cases against Marcus moved forward. He initially tried to fight the charges, claiming the evidence was fabricated or that he was being framed by a vindictive mother-in-law. But the forensic evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. The bank surveillance footage showing Marcus attempting to use forged documents was particularly damning. His own voice recorded on video presenting fake identification and false power of attorney documents made it impossible for him to claim innocence. 8 months after his arrest, Marcus Liu accepted a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement, attempted elder financial abuse, and violating the terms of his bail from the original California charges. In exchange for the guilty plea, prosecutors recommended concurrent sentences that would total 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving 20 years. Judge Williamson presided over the sentencing hearing. Rebecca and I were both there, along with several of Marcus' other victims who wanted to see justice served. It was powerful seeing all those women in the courtroom, each representing a life that Marcus had damaged through his selfish criminal behavior. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, Marcus offered a half-hearted apology that rang hollow. He claimed he had fallen into a pattern of bad choices and regretted the harm he had caused. But even while apologizing, he could not help trying to manipulate, suggesting that he had really cared about Rebecca and the children and that his feelings had been genuine even if his identity was false. Judge Williamson was having none of it. "Mr. Liu, you are a predator who has spent over a decade targeting vulnerable people for financial exploitation. You have stolen millions of dollars, destroyed lives, betrayed trust, and shown no genuine remorse for your actions. Your attempt to portray yourself as someone who made mistakes rather than someone who deliberately committed crimes is simply more manipulation." She sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison, ordered full restitution to all victims, and added restrictions that would prevent him from accessing others' financial information or working in any position of trust ever again. As the bailiff led Marcus away to begin his sentence, he looked back at me one last time. His expression was not remorse or regret but cold anger at being caught by the one person who had seen through him from the beginning. I met his gaze steadily and did not look away. I wanted him to know that he had not broken my family despite his best efforts. I wanted him to understand that his arrogance and underestimation of a protective grandmother had been his ultimate downfall. The restitution process took over a year to complete. Forensic accountants traced Marcus' various thefts and identified hidden accounts where he had stashed stolen money. Between recovered funds and the sale of assets Marcus had purchased with stolen money, most of his victims received substantial restitution. Hayes Enterprises recovered $1.8 million of the $2.7 million that had been embezzled. It was not everything, but it was enough to keep the company stable. More importantly, the publicity about how I had caught Marcus actually helped our business reputation. We were seen as a company with strong ethics and leadership that would not tolerate fraud. Rebecca took over as CEO of Hayes Enterprises after everything settled down. She had proven herself during the crisis, maintaining operations and supporting employees through a difficult period. She was ready for the responsibility, and I was ready to step back and let the next generation lead. My grandchildren adjusted better than I expected. Children are resilient, and with proper support they processed their feelings about Marcus' betrayal and moved forward. Sophie became passionate about criminal justice and talked about becoming a prosecutor. Nathan developed an interest in cybersecurity and protecting people from online fraud. As for me, I retired from active management of the company but remained involved as chairman of the board. I also started volunteering with organizations that helped fraud victims and educated seniors about financial exploitation. My experience with Marcus made me an effective advocate for stronger protections against the kind of sophisticated fraud he had committed. 3 years after Marcus' sentencing, I received a letter from one of his early victims in California. Her name was Dorothy Chen, no relation to the real Marcus Chen whose identity had been stolen. She was the elderly widow who Marcus had first defrauded when he was still operating under his real name of Marcus Liu. Mrs. Hayes, her letter began, I wanted to thank you for finally bringing Marcus Liu to justice. I lost my life savings to that man 12 years ago, and I thought I would never see any form of restitution or justice. Because of your investigation and the evidence you compiled, I received full restitution for what he stole from me. Dorothy went on to explain that she had used the restitution money to establish a foundation that provided financial education and fraud prevention resources for seniors. She wanted to turn her painful experience into something that would help protect others from becoming victims. I was moved by Dorothy's resilience and her determination to create something positive from such a negative experience. It reminded me that while Marcus had caused tremendous harm, he had also inadvertently created a community of strong survivors who were now working to protect others. Rebecca and I traveled to Los Angeles to meet Dorothy and tour the foundation she had created. It was inspiring seeing how she had transformed her victimization into activism and education. The foundation offered free workshops on recognizing financial scams, protecting personal information, and knowing warning signs of exploitation. Mom, Rebecca said as we drove back to our hotel after visiting the foundation, I have been thinking about what Dorothy said about turning pain into purpose. I want to do something similar. What did you have in mind? I want to write a book about what happened with Marcus. Not just our story but the stories of all his victims. I want people to understand how sophisticated these fraudsters are and how anyone can become a victim regardless of intelligence or education. And I want to show how fighting back is possible. I think that is a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Our story might help other families recognize warning signs or encourage victims to come forward. Rebecca spent the next year writing her book. It was a difficult process that required her to relive painful memories and confront feelings of shame and guilt that still lingered despite therapy. But it was also cathartic and empowering to take control of the narrative and use her experience to help others. The book was published 2 years after Marcus' sentencing. It became a bestseller and sparked important conversations about financial fraud, romance scams, and the sophisticated tactics used by professional con artists. Rebecca did interviews and speaking events, becoming a powerful advocate for fraud victims and pushing for stronger legal protections. During one of her book tour events, a woman approached Rebecca with tears in her eyes. She explained that she had been in a relationship with a man who was showing warning signs similar to what Rebecca described in her book. Because of what she had read, she hired a private investigator and discovered her boyfriend was using a false identity and had embezzled from previous employers. "You saved me from what you went through," the woman told Rebecca. "I got out before he could destroy my life financially." That moment made everything worthwhile for Rebecca. Knowing that sharing our painful story had protected someone else from similar harm gave meaning to what we had endured. 5 years after Marcus was sent to prison, I received notification that he had attempted to file an appeal claiming his constitutional rights had been violated during the investigation. His new attorney argued that the surveillance at the bank had been conducted without proper warrants and that evidence should be suppressed. The appeal was quickly dismissed. The surveillance had been entirely legal because Marcus had no reasonable expectation of privacy when committing fraud at a bank. But the attempt showed that Marcus was still trying to manipulate the system and escape consequences for his actions. I was not surprised. Men like Marcus Liu never truly accept responsibility for their behavior. They always believe they are smarter than everyone else and that rules do not apply to them. Even prison had not changed his fundamental character. What had changed was that he no longer had access to victims. He could not charm his way into trust or manipulate vulnerable people for financial gain. He was simply another inmate serving time for his crimes, and he would be for the next 15 years at minimum. Rebecca eventually started dating again, though she approached new relationships with much more caution than before. She made sure her partners underwent thorough background checks before she introduced them to the children. She watched for red flags and trusted her instincts in ways she had not before Marcus. When she met David, a high school history teacher with 2 kids of his own from a previous marriage, I watched their relationship develop with careful attention. But David was genuine in ways that Marcus had never been. He had normal human flaws and imperfections. He did not try too hard to be perfect or say exactly what Rebecca wanted to hear. He was just himself, and that authenticity was refreshing after years of Marcus' calculated performances. Rebecca and David got married in a small ceremony 6 years after Marcus went to prison. It was a modest celebration focused on family and genuine connection, rather than the elaborate production her first wedding to Marcus had been. Watching Rebecca genuinely happy with someone who truly loved her for herself rather than what he could steal from her family was deeply satisfying. My grandchildren thrived as they grew older. Sophie graduated high school and went on to study criminal justice in college, determined to become a prosecutor who would put away people like Marcus. Nathan developed into a talented computer programmer with a focus on cybersecurity and fraud prevention. They both told me that experiencing Marcus' betrayal, while painful, had taught them valuable lessons about trusting their instincts and protecting themselves. They were more aware, more cautious, and more determined to stand up against people who exploited others. As I reflect on the entire experience now at 77 years old, I recognize that catching Marcus was not just about protecting my family money. It was about refusing to let a predator destroy people I loved. It was about valuing justice over convenience and being willing to invest time and resources into doing what was right even when it was difficult. Too often, elder fraud goes unreported because victims feel embarrassed or believe they cannot fight back against sophisticated criminals. Too often, families ignore warning signs because they want to believe the best about people. Too often, predators like Marcus Liu operate with impunity because good people do not want to seem suspicious or paranoid. My experience taught me that protecting your family sometimes requires being willing to be the person who asks uncomfortable questions, who does not accept surface appearances, and who trusts their instincts even when everyone else thinks they are being unreasonable. It also taught me that patience and methodical preparation can overcome even the most sophisticated fraud schemes. Marcus was smart, charming, and experienced at manipulation. But he was no match for a determined grandmother with time, resources, and the absolute commitment to protecting her family. The folder I handed Judge Williamson that day in court represented 5 years of work, but it also represented something more fundamental. It represented the idea that ordinary people can fight back against criminals who think they are untouchable. It represented the power of refusing to be a victim and instead becoming an advocate for justice. Today, Hayes Enterprises continues to thrive under Rebecca's leadership. We implemented new security measures and fraud prevention protocols that make it much harder for anyone to embezzle or manipulate our financial systems. We conduct thorough background checks on all employees and maintain the kind of vigilant oversight that would have caught Marcus much sooner if it had been in place when he was hired. I still serve on the board and remain active in the company, though my focus now is on mentoring young business owners about protecting themselves from financial fraud. I share our story and the lessons we learned, hoping that other families will be more aware and better prepared than we were. The most rewarding part of my later years has been seeing the positive impact that came from our terrible experience with Marcus. Dorothy Foundation in California, Rebecca Book and advocacy work, my grandchildren career choices focused on justice and protection, and the countless individuals who have reached out to share how our story helped them avoid or escape from similar situations. Marcus Liu remains in federal prison with a projected release date when he will be 68 years old. Even then, he will be on supervised release with restrictions on his activities and access to other people's financial information. His criminal record will follow him forever, making it nearly impossible for him to return to his previous lifestyle of sophisticated fraud. Sometimes I wonder if he has any genuine regrets about the path he chose. Does he think about the lives he damaged and the trust he betrayed? Does he recognize that his arrogance and greed led to his downfall? Or does he still see himself as a victim of circumstances, someone who was unfairly caught by an overzealous grandmother who should have minded her own business? Based on his appeals and the letters he has sent to Rebecca over the years, I suspect it is the latter. Marcus never accepted responsibility for his actions, never showed genuine remorse, and never stopped trying to manipulate even from behind prison walls. His letters to Rebecca alternated between attempts at reconciliation and veiled threats about what he might reveal about her if she did not support his appeals. Rebecca stopped reading his letters after the first few. She realized that engaging with Marcus in any way was simply giving him what he wanted, which was continued access to her thoughts and emotions. The best punishment for a narcissistic manipulator is complete indifference, being forgotten and irrelevant. I kept copies of all his letters though, not because I cared what Marcus had to say but because they served as documentation of his continued attempts at manipulation. If he ever did get released early for some reason, those letters would demonstrate that he remained a danger to our family and should be kept away from us through restraining orders and protective measures. The impact of Marcus' crimes extended far beyond just the financial losses. Rebecca spent years in therapy working through the psychological trauma of being married to someone who was systematically deceiving her. She dealt with trust issues, second-guessed her judgment, and struggled with feelings of shame and embarrassment even though she was the victim. My grandchildren had to process the betrayal of someone they had seen as a father figure. They questioned their own memories of time spent with Marcus, wondering what had been real and what had been performance. They worried that they had somehow failed to protect their mother by not seeing through Marcus' lies. I dealt with my own complicated feelings about the entire situation. While I was proud of catching Marcus and protecting my family, I also felt guilty about not stopping him sooner. Could I have prevented Rebecca from marrying him if I had confronted her earlier? Should I have gone to the police before I had ironclad evidence, even if it meant Marcus might have escaped? These questions haunted me for years until my own therapist helped me understand that I had done the best I could with the information and resources available at the time. Catching a sophisticated fraudster required patience and methodical evidence gathering. Acting too quickly would have allowed Marcus to disappear and potentially victimize other families. The legal system worked in our case, but I learned that many fraud victims never see justice. Criminals like Marcus are often able to evade prosecution by moving between jurisdictions, using false identities, and exploiting gaps in financial oversight. We were fortunate that I had the resources to hire private investigators and forensic accountants. Many families do not have those options. That realization led me to start a foundation similar to Dorothy's work in California. The Hayes Family Foundation provides free investigative services and legal support to families who suspect they are being defrauded by people in positions of trust. We have helped dozens of families over the past few years, catching fraud before it destroys lives and bringing criminals to justice. One case that particularly resonated with me involved a widower in his 80s whose new girlfriend was systematically stealing from him while isolating him from his adult children. The children contacted our foundation because they could not afford a private investigator, and their father refused to believe their concerns about his girlfriend. Our team documented her theft and discovered she had 3 previous victims she had defrauded in similar ways. When confronted with the evidence, the widower was devastated but grateful his children had fought to protect him. The girlfriend was prosecuted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. That man sent me a letter afterward thanking the foundation for saving him from financial ruin and helping him see the truth. He had been lonely after his wife's death and desperate for companionship, which the girlfriend had exploited ruthlessly. His letter reminded me why the work we do matters, even when it is difficult and painful. Rebecca became involved with the foundation as well, using her experience and platform to raise awareness about financial exploitation. She served on the board of directors and helped develop educational programs for families about recognizing warning signs of fraud. Together we created something positive from the terrible experience Marcus had put us through. The media attention from Rebecca's book and our foundation work led to legislative changes as well. Several states passed stronger laws against elder financial abuse, increased penalties for identity theft, and created better protections for families dealing with fraud. We testified before legislative committees, sharing our story and advocating for reforms that would help other families avoid what we went through. One senator told me that our testimony was instrumental in passing comprehensive fraud protection legislation in our state. The law created a registry of financial predators similar to sex offender registries, required stricter background checks for financial professionals, and gave families more tools to protect vulnerable members from exploitation. Knowing that Marcus' crimes had inadvertently led to legal reforms that would protect thousands of families gave meaning to our suffering. We could not undo what Marcus had done to us and his other victims, but we could work to prevent future victims from experiencing similar harm. 8 years after Marcus' sentencing, Rebecca and I were invited to speak at a national conference on elder fraud prevention. The audience included law enforcement officials, social workers, financial professionals, and advocates from across the country. Standing on that stage and sharing our story with hundreds of people working to combat fraud was surreal. During the question and answer session, a young woman raised her hand and asked how we had found the strength to fight back when so many fraud victims simply accept their losses and move on. It was a profound question that made me reflect on what had driven me throughout the entire ordeal with Marcus. I found strength in love for my family, I answered honestly. When someone threatens the people you love, you discover reserves of determination you never knew you had. I also found strength in anger at the injustice of what Marcus was doing. He was deliberately harming good people for his own selfish gain, and I refused to let him get away with it. Rebecca added her own perspective. For me, finding strength meant accepting that I had been victimized but refusing to remain a victim. Marcus took advantage of my trust and my desire for love, but he could not take away my agency or my ability to fight back once I understood what he was doing. Reclaiming my power meant holding him accountable. The audience gave us a standing ovation. Later, dozens of people approached us to share their own stories of fraud and exploitation. Some were survivors who had fought back successfully. Others were family members who had lost loved ones to predators like Marcus. All of them thanked us for being willing to speak publicly about something many people find shameful or embarrassing. Those conversations reinforced my belief that silence protects perpetrators while exposure protects potential victims. The more we talk openly about financial fraud and the sophisticated tactics criminals use, the harder it becomes for those criminals to operate successfully. My grandchildren grew into remarkable young adults shaped by their experience with Marcus in ways that were ultimately positive despite the initial trauma. Sophie graduated from law school and became a federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. Her first major case involved prosecuting a romance scammer who had defrauded multiple women, and she secured a conviction with a 15-year sentence. Sophie called me after the verdict to tell me that catching that criminal felt like honoring what our family had been through. She understood the devastation fraud causes and was committed to holding perpetrators accountable. She had turned her childhood trauma into a career protecting others from similar harm. Nathan became a cybersecurity consultant working with financial institutions to identify and prevent fraud. He developed algorithms that detected suspicious patterns in financial transactions, helping banks catch embezzlement and theft before significant losses occurred. His work protected millions of dollars and countless potential victims. Both of my grandchildren credited their career choices to witnessing how I had methodically built a case against Marcus. They learned that fighting injustice required patience, attention to detail, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right even when it was difficult. Those lessons served them well in their chosen professions. Rebecca continued to thrive as CEO of Hayes Enterprises. Under her leadership, the company expanded into new markets and doubled in size. She implemented ethical business practices and fraud prevention measures that became industry standards. Her reputation as a business leader who had overcome personal and professional adversity made her a sought-after speaker and mentor. She also became a fierce advocate for other women in business, particularly those who had experienced financial abuse or fraud. She mentored dozens of women rebuilding their careers and lives after being victimized by partners or business associates. Watching her transform her pain into purpose for helping others made me incredibly proud. As for me, I stepped fully into retirement at age 75, though I remained active in the foundation and continued to speak occasionally about fraud prevention. I found peace in knowing that I had protected my family and helped create systems that would protect other families as well. I spent more time with my great-grandchildren, Rebecca and David children, and Sophie, 2 young daughters. I told them age-appropriate stories about the importance of trusting their instincts, protecting themselves from people who might try to take advantage of them, and standing up for what is right even when it is scary or difficult. I wanted them to grow up with the wisdom I had gained through hard experience, but without having to suffer the same painful lessons. I wanted them to be cautious without being cynical, protective without being paranoid, and strong without being hardened. On quiet evenings, I sometimes took out that folder of evidence that had brought Marcus down. The documents were yellowing now, the photographs fading slightly, but they represented one of the most important things I had ever done. They were proof that ordinary people can defeat sophisticated criminals when they refuse to give up. I thought about all the hours Raymond and I had spent documenting Marcus' activities, all the sleepless nights worrying about whether we would catch him in time, all the difficult decisions about when to act and when to wait. It had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also been necessary. Marcus had underestimated me because I was a grandmother who seemed conventional and non-threatening. He thought I would be too trusting or too naive to see through his carefully constructed facade. His biggest mistake was assuming that age and apparent gentleness meant weakness or stupidity. What Marcus failed to understand was that people who build successful businesses and protect families for decades develop very sharp instincts about character and motivation. We learn to read people, recognize inconsistencies, and trust our gut feelings when something does not add up. Those skills do not diminish with age. They actually become more refined through experience. I was not a naive grandmother who could be easily fooled. I was a woman who had spent 40 years running a business, managing complex financial transactions, and dealing with all kinds of people. I knew what a professional liar looked like because I had encountered plenty of them over the years in various business contexts. Marcus' charm and polish might have worked on someone without that background, but they triggered immediate suspicion in me. I recognized the performance because I had seen variations of it many times before. The difference was that this time the stakes were not just business deals but my family safety and financial security. 10 years after Marcus' arrest, I received an unexpected letter from him. It was different from his previous communications, which had all been self-serving attempts at manipulation. This letter seemed more reflective and honest, though I maintained healthy skepticism about anything Marcus wrote. "Mrs. Hayes," the letter began, "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, and I am not asking for forgiveness or understanding. I simply wanted you to know that I finally comprehend how thoroughly you defeated me, not just legally but strategically. You saw through me from the beginning and spent 5 years methodically building a trap I walked into willingly. The letter continued with Marcus acknowledging specific ways I had outmaneuvered him. He recognized how I had created additional financial protections specifically designed to catch fraud attempts. He understood that I had been monitoring his activities throughout his time at Hayes Enterprises. He even admitted that he had underestimated me because of age and gender bias. What struck me most was a paragraph near the end. You protected your family the way I should have protected mine instead of exploiting them. You showed the kind of fierce love and commitment that I pretended to have but never actually felt. In prison, I have had time to recognize that my inability to genuinely care about anyone is the root of everything I destroyed, including my own life. I read the letter several times, trying to determine if it represented genuine insight or just another manipulation attempt. Prison sometimes does force people into self-reflection, and Marcus had certainly had plenty of time to think about his choices and their consequences. But I also knew that people with narcissistic and antisocial traits rarely develop genuine empathy even with time and therapy. I showed the letter to my therapist, who helped me process it without getting drawn back into Marcus' orbit. Whether or not his insight was genuine did not really matter to my life anymore. Marcus was in prison where he belonged, my family was safe and thriving, and we had built something positive from the experience. His personal growth or lack thereof was no longer my concern. I did not respond to the letter. There was nothing Marcus could say or offer that I needed or wanted. The only communication I desired from him was continued absence from my family lives. Silence was not cruelty but appropriate boundaries with someone who had repeatedly violated trust. Rebecca's decision not to tell Marcus about her remarriage or the births of her children with David was one I fully supported. Marcus had no right to information about our family, no claim to our lives, and no reason to know anything about how we had moved forward without him. He was a chapter we had closed, not a relationship we maintained. The foundation work continued to expand and evolve. We partnered with law enforcement agencies to train officers in recognizing and investigating financial fraud. We developed educational programs for schools teaching young people about protecting personal information and recognizing manipulation tactics. We created support groups for fraud survivors to share experiences and healing strategies. One initiative I was particularly proud of involved training bank employees to recognize potential elder fraud. We taught them warning signs like sudden changes in financial patterns, customers being accompanied by controlling companions who answered questions for them, or requests that seemed inconsistent with a customer's established behavior. Our training helped bank employees prevent multiple fraud attempts. They learned to ask gentle questions and offer private conversations when they suspected a customer was being exploited. Many elderly people were saved from losing their life savings because an alert bank teller recognized warning signs and intervened appropriately. The work was deeply satisfying because it addressed the problem proactively rather than just responding after damage was done. Prevention meant fewer victims suffering the trauma and loss that Marcus had inflicted on so many people, including my own family. As I approached my 80th birthday, I reflected on the unexpected direction my later years had taken. I had planned for a quiet retirement focused on family, travel, and perhaps some volunteer work. Instead, I had become an advocate and educator about financial fraud, known nationally for catching a sophisticated criminal who had evaded justice for over a decade. Life rarely goes according to plan, but sometimes the detours lead to meaningful destinations. Marcus' crimes against my family had been terrible, but the work that emerged from that experience had protected countless other families and created systemic changes that would benefit people for generations. Rebecca organized a surprise party for my 80th birthday, bringing together family, friends, colleagues from Hayes Enterprises, and people whose lives had been touched by our foundation work. Dorothy flew in from California along with several other Marcus victims who had become friends over the years. Raymond attended with his wife, and we laughed about our years of secret surveillance work. The most touching moment came when Sophie and Nathan presented me with a gift on behalf of all my descendants. It was a leather-bound book containing letters from people our foundation had helped over the years. Hundreds of families had written to share how our work had protected them from fraud, helped them recover from victimization, or gave them resources to fight back against exploitation. Reading those letters was overwhelming. Each one represented lives saved from the kind of devastation Marcus had caused. Each one showed that sharing our painful story and doing the hard work of advocacy had created ripples of protection spreading far beyond our immediate family. "Grandma," Sophie said as I wiped away tears, "you taught us that protecting the people you love sometimes requires being harder and smarter than the people trying to hurt them. You showed us that age is not weakness and that gentle people can be fierce when necessary. Everything we have become is built on lessons we learned watching you take down Marcus." Nathan added, "You also taught us that justice is not just about punishment but about prevention and protection. The work you started has helped so many people, and we are committed to continuing it for the rest of our lives." Looking around that room at my family and friends, at the community we had built from ashes of betrayal and fraud, I felt profound gratitude. Marcus had tried to destroy us, but instead he had inadvertently brought out our greatest strengths and revealed our deepest values. We had taken the worst experience of our lives and transformed it into something that helped thousands of people. We had turned victimization into advocacy, pain into purpose, and betrayal into a commitment to protecting others. That transformation was not about Marcus at all. It was about who we chose to become in response to what he had done. As the party continued around me, I thought about that moment in the courtroom 10 years earlier when I had stood up with a folder full of evidence and brought Marcus' criminal career to an end. That moment had required 5 years of preparation, countless resources, and absolute determination. But more than that, it had required believing that standing up to a predator was possible even when he seemed untouchable. It had required trusting my instincts even when everyone else thought I was being paranoid. It had required patience to build a case that would guarantee justice rather than acting impulsively and letting him escape. Those same qualities, patience, determination, trusting instincts, and commitment to justice, had guided everything we built afterward. The foundation work, the legislative advocacy, the educational programs, all of it emerged from refusing to accept that Marcus' crimes were simply something to endure silently and move on from. We chose instead to fight back not just for ourselves but for everyone who might encounter someone like Marcus in the future. We chose to transform private tragedy into public protection. We chose to believe that ordinary people armed with truth and determination could create extraordinary change. That choice made all the difference. Not just for our family but for the thousands of families who benefited from the work we did. Marcus Liu thought he was a master manipulator who could exploit anyone. What he discovered was that underestimating a determined grandmother was the biggest mistake of his criminal career. As I stood to give a speech thanking everyone for coming to celebrate my birthday, I looked at the faces of the people who had become part of this unexpected journey. My family thriving and strong. Marcus victims healed and empowered. Foundation colleagues, dedicated to protecting others. Law enforcement partners, committed to bringing predators to justice. We had created something beautiful from something terrible. We had proven that love and determination can overcome calculated evil. We had shown that justice might be slow but it is achievable when people refuse to give up. And most importantly, we had sent a message to every potential predator that some people cannot be conned, some families cannot be broken, and some grandmothers are far more dangerous than they appear. Marcus Liu learned that lesson the hard way, spending the best years of his remaining life in federal prison while the family he tried to destroy flourished and grew stronger. That was the real victory. Not just catching him but proving that we were resilient enough to rebuild, strong enough to help others, and committed enough to create lasting change. Marcus took 5 years of our lives, but we took his freedom and his ability to hurt anyone else ever again. In the end, that was justice. Not just punishment for what he did but protection for what he would never be able to do again. And that made every sleepless night, every dollar spent on investigation, and every difficult moment of the 5-year battle completely worthwhile. The party continued late into the evening filled with laughter, stories, and celebration of not just my birthday but everything we had accomplished together. As I finally headed home, Exhausted but deeply happy, I thought about the letter Marcus had sent acknowledging my victory over him. He was right about one thing. I had defeated him thoroughly and completely. Not through luck or accident but through careful planning, unwavering determination, and absolute refusal to let a predator destroy my family. That was a victory I would carry with pride for the rest of my days. And somewhere in a federal prison cell, Marcus Liu would spend the next 8 years thinking about the grandmother he had so foolishly underestimated. That thought brought a satisfied smile to my face as I turned out the light and went to sleep, secure in the knowledge that my family was safe, protected, and thriving despite his best efforts to ruin us. Justice had been served. Lessons had been learned. And a new generation was growing up understanding that protecting the people you love sometimes requires being harder and smarter than those trying to hurt them. That legacy was worth more than anything Marcus had tried to steal.